Hello and welcome to Dorno Does. Today we're going to be making a comfort grip slimline pen out of oak. So sit back and enjoy the ride. Okay, so after we have selected what we want to turn, in this case it's a pen, we go through and decide what material we want to make it out of, and since it's a custom motor, that decision is made for us. They want it out of red oak. So then we take a blank and we cut the pieces to length, and that length is determined by the brass tube that is the center of the pen. So the tube is what creates the center of the pen that all the metal hardware gets pressed into. So this length, you need to make your blank that long, plus a little bit, because you need to trim the ends to the end of the barrel to make everything square. So here I have a little jig I've made. On here, most of it's in pencil, so you can't really read it, but I have lines on here for the different lengths of the different kits, for the parts that I need. So you take, and the way I have this jig set is you take and put the end of your blank on the line for the kit you're doing. Then you run it through the saw, and that'll give you one end of the blank. Some kits you have 2 pieces of wood, some you have 1. It all depends on which kit you're doing. So in this case, this pen kit needs 2 the same length. And you want to try and find the straightest edge so it doesn't rock. So there's one. And there's 2. Okay, so because this is a pen that uses 2 pieces of wood, I want to make sure that the grain orientation is correct when you go and assemble the pen. You don't want to have mismatched grain. So this is the way they were, and we just cut there. So just take a Sharpie, put a line across so we know which ends match. And this is actually the second blank of the 5 that I needed to make. So this is number 2. And I'll go through and I'll make the cuts and create the blanks for the other 3 pens, because this was a custom order of 5 pens that are similar. They won't be exact because the grain's going to be different. Plus, they're turned by hand, so there may be little variations in the shape. I'm not a machine. Everything comes out the way it comes out. So when these are cut, even though there's 5 of the same kit, same type of wood, they will all look different, because of the way the grain is. They're never going to be exactly the same. So that's why on my website you'll always see just one in stock, because I take a picture of every pen and list it separately. So when you look at the website, you know exactly what you're getting. It's not going to be, well, it's similar to this. So something that I do is I will save these little tiny cutoffs and use them in casting or segmented work. So I try not to waste anything. So I have buckets of these little pieces that will get used eventually in something. And this one here is actually long enough to make a certain pen kit. So this one here is actually a pen blank currently. It's not scrap. So again, this will go into the pen blank pile and be utilized at some point as well. Okay, so now that you have your blanks cut, you want to then drill your hole through the blank to be able to put that brass tube in. Now this kit takes a 7mm hole drilled through for those brass tubes. So come over to the drill press, and we have a 7mm bit chucked up. Now this vise here, this was created by a gentleman on the International Pen Turners Forum. So what this does is it has jaws that move evenly when you turn the handle, and they have little notches so you can put, they have little notches that will grab the corners. So if your blank isn't perfectly square, which they generally never are, wood moves from when it's cut. So you put it in here, it grabs the corners, it holds it tight, you drill your hole. Now because wood is never square, going back to the marking the same face and the same blanks, so we have the grain aligned. So I'll put one blank in with the line facing this way, and then I'll take its corresponding blank, I'll turn it so the same cut face, so the same joining face is where the mandrel drill, where the drill bit starts, but I'll turn it 180 degrees from this one. So even if there's some variance, the grain has the best possibility of lining up. And also keep in mind that there will be a small metal band separating the two, so even if there's a little variation, you're not going to notice it, but it would be definitely noticeable if you didn't try it all. I have this laser here, which just confirms that when I come down, this is a brad point bit, so it has a little sharp tip on it. I can come down, mark the blank, and it will just confirm that everything is centered correctly. Make sure nothing got bumped, you know, from the last time it was used. And you want to drill slow, so when the drill bit comes out the bottom, you don't have a giant blowout down here. So you go slow and just let the drill do the work, and you'll get a clean hole. So the last one was in this way. So we'll turn it 180 degrees so it faces the other direction. And there's one. So there's one set of blanks. Lines line up, and your holes will line up here at the center. Okay, so now you have your holes drilled, and then the kits used to come with a smooth brass, so you'd have to take and scuff up the brass with sandpaper. Just got some new kits and they came pre-scuffed, so that's convenient. And so what that scuffing does is it gives the glue something to hold on to versus just smooth brass. Then you want to take some CA glue. This is a thick CA glue. They come in different formulas. You'll see later on I use a thin. So use the thick, which helps fill any imperfections in between the blank and the tube. So you want to put some glue on there. And then what I do is I continually twirl it so it doesn't all run off. And then you take your blank, and then as you're putting it in, again, you twirl the two together just to so you get coverage on everything. And then you slide your tube in so that it's flush or just slightly below the wood. And you've cut your blank a little longer than the blank. You cut your blank a little bit longer than the tube, if you remember, for the next step, which is trimming the blank square with the barrel. And then you just set them aside to cure for a few minutes. Okay, so now you've taken and glued your brass tubes into your drilled out blank. And the next step is to trim the blank to the length of the brass tube. You've cut it a little long to allow for this step. So we have this kit here. It has all different size guides for different size brass tubes. They do have a little flute on them, so that'll cut any super glue that may have gotten inside the tube when you were gluing them together. So that cleans the inside of the tube. And then it does have cutters up here, so this will go down inside the tube, and then this will trim the blank perpendicular to the brass tube. So if your cuts aren't perfectly square on the blank, or your hole got skewed because the drill bit followed some grain or whatever, this will make the end of your blank perpendicular to your tube that's in the blank. So here's the blank, here's the tube. You can see the super glue that's squeezed out, so this will also clean up that. This will just go in, and it's on a drill, so this spins and trims the blank to the tube, and you can see it's long enough that it sticks out the bottom, so if any super glue was in the tube, it's cleaned out. You do that to both sides on this Comfort Grip Slimline. It has 2 blanks. Some pens only have 1. So you do this for each blank of the pen you're making. So let me do that. You do want to go slow, and I don't know if that's showing up on camera. The brass is now shiny on the end, and you can see little tiny chatter marks on it. That means that you've actually got down to the brass. Once you hit it, you want to stop. Doesn't matter how much you've cut off. So on this side here, where the tube is further in, because we left the blank long, so this one will cut off more. Until the brass is shiny. And now this blank is trimmed. Take the second one that's paired to it. And now that one's shiny. So these now are trimmed to the correct length. All right, so now we've chosen our blank, we've chosen our pen kit, we've cut the blanks to length, we've drilled the hole for the tube, we've glued the tubes in, we've trimmed the blanks up to the tube. The next step is to put it on the lathe. So depending again on the kit that you're using will determine how it mounts on the lathe. This kit here, where it has 2 blanks, you will need to use a mandrel. So this is what a mandrel looks like. So it does have a taper which goes into the head of the lathe. This one here is a Morse 2 taper. So that will just slide in, and then the inside of the lathe head has the reverse taper. So as it pushes in, the 2 tapers bind together and cause friction to allow it to spin without being mechanically screwed together. Then this mandrel also has an adjustable shaft. So if you loosen this shaft will slide in and out to accommodate different lengths of pens. There are some that have a fixed mandrel shaft, and those you need to then put your blanks on and then take extra pen bushing blanks and use as spacers to be able to tighten that up. I like this one because you can adjust this length to create a much firmer shaft, especially if you're using a smaller blank. All right, so here we have the head of the lathe. Here's the hole that the mandrel goes in. So that just slides in. This here is used to get the mandrel out. This is actually hollow all the way through. So that just slides in. You want to just kind of seat it. You don't need to go crazy with it. when you tighten down the tailstock, that will also help hold it in. All right, so you take your blank, and with this one here, we're trying to keep the grain oriented the same. So we do have our joining point, so that'll be the middle of the pen. So we take one bushing, slide it on the mandrel. We take one blank, slide that on. We take our middle bushing, slide that on. We take our second blank, slide that on. Then we take our third bushing, put that on. And this is where the adjustable mandrel comes in nice. So I have it adjusted so that the knurled nut will tighten down on the threads onto that bushing. If you had a fixed shaft, it would be a lot longer to accommodate a lot of pens. So then you would have to just start stuffing other pen blanks on. You'd have to start stuffing other pen bushings on in order to fill the gaps to allow your knurled nut to tighten down. So that just screws on, and then you just make it finger tight. You're not cranking down on it with wrenches or anything like that. So now you have your pen blanks and your bushings onto your mandrel. Then you take, so this is your tailstock. You take and slide that up, and in your tailstock you have a live center. So the center itself will turn. When you put a center in the headstock, you want a dead center. So this would be a dead center. So it's just, again, it has a number 2 Morse on it. It has a point on it to stick into whatever you're working on. But when the headstock turns, this turns with it. So this gives you the drive force from the headstock versus your tailstock. So this stays stationary in the tailstock, but it allows this to spin. So this will hold whatever you're working on in line with the headstock, but it won't burn. It won't dig in itself. You know, the point will push in when you tighten it down, and it'll push in as far as you tighten it down. But when you start turning, it won't try and turn the tailstock. This will just stay stationary, and then this spins with your workpiece. So in the tail of the mandrel, there's a little tiny cone, and that corresponds to the 60-degree point on your tailstock. So you slide your tailstock up till it's close, and then you tighten this down. Now, when you're working with a mandrel, you want to be very careful. You don't want to crank on this, because what will happen is your tailstock will push on the mandrel, and so rather than being it straight, when you're done and you have it tightened, it'll flex. So if you do that, then the centers of your pen will be oblong. So you just want to bring it down until it just touches a tiny bit more, and then you lock down the tailstock so it can't move. So that's put pressure on the mandrel shaft, which pushes pressure on the Morse taper and locks everything together. So when you turn it on, your headstock turns, which turns your Morse taper, which turns the shaft, and then you can see this is spinning where this isn't. Then you bring your tool rest up, and then before you ever turn that on, you want to make sure that it's not hitting. So with oak, and it's very splintery, so when you're going and trimming off the corners, you want to be mindful that it will break off in chunks. So you don't need to be too worried about that unless it's a major chunk, which may go down to the pen barrel, and then you start over. And you want the lathe turning quickly. This here is a skew, so it has taper on both sides. Whenever you're turning, you want to do your best to be riding on this bevel. So you don't want to just stick this in and have it float around. You want to have it firm on your tool rest and try and match this bevel to your workpiece. Now when you're first starting, you can see that it's still square, so it's going to be difficult. It's also very handy to learn to turn in both directions. And you can see that this is barely spinning, so that needs to be a little bit tighter. But it wasn't making firm contact. When I was turning, it pushed the Morse taper in a little bit more to make it tighter. And so that's grabbing tighter, but it loosened up on this end. So it just little tweak, and now we're good. And you can see with just that little bit versus we're almost round. So you can see here how it's just peeling the wood back, making, so you're cutting the wood off and it's just peeling it off in these little ribbons. And you want to keep removing wood until you get down to the bushings. So then you want to bring it down to it's almost touching the bushings. You can always sand that down flush with the bushings. And you want to try not to cut your bushings with your tools, because then you've made your bushing smaller, and every subsequent pen that you make will be smaller and smaller, and it won't fit the hardware. Alright, so there we have that turned down. Is a little proud of the bushings, which is fine. Like I said, you're going to be sanding it. You'll hear different schools of thought on sanding. Some people like to sand as fast as they have the lathe turning. I find that when you do that, you're actually burnishing the wood with the sandpaper versus actually sanding. So I'll turn the speed down. I do have a variable speed lathe, so it lends itself to that. If you don't have one, then obviously you can't. My lathe will also go in reverse. So it turns this way to cut, and then I reverse it, so I have it spinning the opposite way to sand. So you go as slow and reverse, and then you just run through your grits. You want to start with like an 80 or 100 grit to knock down all your high points that you may have left, and this will also get it down to the bushings. And I know sanding is about as exciting as watching paint dry or grass grow, but it is a necessary step. You also don't want to wrap around the wood and have it wrapped around yourself. You never want to work on the lathe with anything that is wrapped around your hand, because if the lathe does catch it, it doesn't care, and you can get injured pretty quickly. You want to have your long hair tied up. Obviously that's not a problem for me. But you just want to make sure you don't have anything near this, what's spinning on the lathe. Alright, so we've gone through. Doesn't take very long if you've cut things down close to your bushings. And then after you finish each grit, you want to take and run with the grain just to remove any possible grooves that you've put circularly into your wood. So with the grain, back and forth. Just spin it by hand. Alright, so that was 80 grit. And then I try and go I go 80 or 100. Then I jump up to a 240, a 320. and then a 400, and then for wood pens I stop at 400. For resin pens, because the plastic is less forgiving with scratches, I go up to higher grits. I go up to an 800 grit on my resins. So once again, we've just finished the 80 grit. We've turned it with the lathe on. We've gone and we've sanded it with the grain. So now we take our next grit, and then each additional grit will take less time. Your first grit is going to be your shaping grit. Now you're just removing the scratches from the previous grit. So you're not trying to remove a tremendous amount of wood. Okay. Alright, so now we have it sanded. And just kind of wipe the dust off. A finish I like to use on pens is it's super glue. It gives a decent shine, not too crazy shiny, but it's durable. So you just take a little bit on a little piece of paper towel, turn your lathe up, and I waited too long for that, because it will flash off quickly. So a little bit. The thing with super glue is your little pads that you make can only be used once, because when the super glue dries it turns very hard. A couple drops. Quick hit. New pad. Yeah. You can fold it to have one end and then the other end. Now something you do need to be cautious of too is not to get the super glue on your fingers, because you will glue your fingers together. You may ask, well, why don't you wear gloves? I find that the gloves stick to the super glue faster than my skin does. I can feel it starting to stick on my fingers and move. I've had gloves on where I'm doing this. The glue will set to the glove will then stick to the pen, and just like I was saying, you don't want to have loose things around the lathe. The glove will then grab onto the pen blank and try and pull my hand in. Your mileage may vary, you know, that's up to you how you want to do it, but that's why I don't wear gloves. So a couple little finishes, a couple runs with the super glue. Just take a look, stop the lathe, take a look, make sure there's no scratches that you've missed, because with some woods you can see right away, you can see the scratches. With oak, I find that the scratches don't show up until you put the finish on. So you run through, you make sure that there aren't any scratches. Once you've put a little finish on it, and that looks good, and we'll put a little bit more, one or two more coats on. And you can see there, super glue soaked through the paper towel, stuck to my finger, but not badly. Okay, so that is this turned, which, depending on the pen kit, you may be done at this point with your blank. This pen kit here has that rubbered comfort grip area on the end of the pen where the nib is, where the ink comes out. So we need to cut 1 inch off of this blank. So we've gone through all the trouble of turning it, and now we have to go and cut it. So you take, just to make it so you can see what you're doing. And yes, I know I'm not using one of my own pens. I sell those. And if this pen gets damaged here, it doesn't matter. I just throw it away. So now we have a line. So this is 1 inch from the end. So we need to cut this off, and we need to cut it square. So you don't want to be cutting this tool here, parting tool. It makes a very thin cut. So we want to have this end, this is the finished pen part. So we want to have this end square. You don't want to have it go this way and have a taper, because then the rubber won't go all the way to your wood. You can taper it ever so slightly back into the pen to make sure that you're flush, but you want it at least straight, maybe a little tiny taper up. Okay, so here we are back over at the drill press. Unfortunately, that's all I have. Space is a premium here. And we'll take our kit bag and we'll get all our parts out. So we have our nib. This is that rubber grip section. This here is the clip. This is the cap that holds the clip on. And then this is the center that just separates the two wooden pieces. So it's not 100% where you need to match the grain, because they're never going to touch, but you can visually see the grain across this. So you want to try and make your grain match. That's why we were being cautious of it when we were cutting our blanks. And we have the transmission. This is the part that when you turn the barrels of the pen, it extends and retracts the ink. This is the ink cartridge. This particular pen uses a cross style
So Cross is a registered trademark of the Cross pens. They have a little threaded section here which screws into the transmission. This is just a little rubber tip that comes on the cartridge to help keep the pen ink from drying out while waiting to be put in service. and then of course you have the pen parts that you've turned. So to start assembly, you take the rubber part and I find that just holding it down at the end and rotating it, and then as it comes on, gently, barely gripping this, because if you grip it too tight, it's not going to slide on. But rotating the barrel while gently pushing onto the pen. So there's that, and that's up to the wood section. Then you take your nib and you place that on. Now, all your pen parts, they are a press fit. So right down here, we have a pen press. So it has a nylon section to help prevent marring. I'm not going to say it's going to 100% do it, but so you take your metal parts and you just get them seated. This particular pen press has a hole that the nibs usually fit in. Again, I say usually because you may have a nib that's bigger. And you don't want to slide this out so that your plunger can come in. So you bring it up gently, and then you make sure everything is square, and then gently press that on. So now we have the nib seated. So the transmission on this particular pen style has this line right here. That is how deep you press the transmission into the bottom barrel to make sure that the ink cartridge sticks out the proper amount when you're writing with it. So again, this is a press fit. You get it started. You need to slide this back to give yourself room. Bring it up. And gently make sure that it goes in straight. Because if you push it in off center, you can flare the brass, which will crack your wood or your turn section. So you push that in. I don't think my head's in the way. Until that line is now flush with your turn section. Your ink can now go in. It goes down, and like I said, the cross style screws into here. Here's how much it's sticking out. You can double check that, see if you're happy with it. So it retracts, comes out. So here's your center band that just slides on. And you take your clip section and your cap. Now on this pen style, because where the cap is tapered, it's not hard to know which end is which, but if you were to have a pen that had the same dimensions on both ends of your cap section, so if it was the same dimension end to end, you'd want to mark up at your cap section when you took it off the lathe with a little tick mark that's going to be covered by the cap, so you knew that these sections needed to go together to match your grain. So again, so something else you want to do is take a look at your cap. You look at the grain, and if there's any interesting features of the grain that you want to highlight, you want to have your clip on the opposite side. So you have your clip covering, at least I do, I have my clip covering the most boring section. So, you know, it may have no boring section and you just kind of stick it wherever. So that's a personal preference. So like this section here just has the straight grain versus the darks and the lights and the points. So I like that better. So I'll just, where it's just straight here, I'll take and I'll put my clip there. Your cap goes on. Just get it started with a little light press with your fingers. And again, it does need to be pressed on. Not quite enough. Just until it stops. Now you take your pen pieces and you find your grain match. And then push the two halves together. And you've created a slimline comfort grip pen. Okay, so there we have the pen finished. We have the display box. And that is what the customer will get, along with a business card. Please like, subscribe, and comment. As always, God bless. Have a wonderful day.